Hello everybody, this is Project Alpha. My name is Nikolai Feldman and you are watching live War Diary with Alexey Arestovych. Alexey is online. Hello, good evening. If it is good, right? If it is good, that's a good wording. Not good again, right? And not a good day either, frankly. As the last stream, we're starting with bringing most urgent questions, and as we did last time, we touched upon the objects of civilian infrastructure, and you made careful suggestions that this is probably not related with peace negotiations. But today it does appear that Russians actually picked an object to attack, OKHMATDET Kids Hospital, more living infrastructure, and some companies in Kryvyi Rog, where there is definitely no military targets present. And of course, it's probably also, there's a idea that it might be a retaliation for our attacks on their energy structures and energy transfer systems. What do you think? Well, okay, regardless of motives, goals, and targets, that includes those who targeted these objects. And, oh, hang on, Alexey, your sound disappeared. Alexey, if you can re-log once again, we have issues with electricity here, and we are on a backup generator, so it comes and goes. Please re-enter the chat, the team meeting. If you guys hear me, I will continue the train of thought here until Alexey comes back. Ministry of Defense of Russia just commented this attack. The goals of the attack have been achieved. We used high-precision weapons to destroy military objects within Ukraine. Alexey, you're back, right? Yes, I am. Okay, great. All right, so let's define the ones responsible and the guilty. Regardless of what goals did Russians put in front of them, what goals did the executors, the Russian military leadership, and those who support them had, regardless whether it's accident, not accident, targeted, didn't target civilians, because they will dump and pump a lot of versions into a lot of scenarios into the discussion. That's exactly how they did with MH17 flight. And they will activate a lot of different ones, authoritative and non-authoritative, random, satire, whatever they can find. But basically all that will be targeted at washing away the responsibility. But using the weapons of this precision, in quotes, on the civilian objects in a big megapolis in the daytime, when people and civilians are moving about, when civilian life is abundant, this is a military crime. There will be more legal judgment, but the way I see that, it is definitely a military crime. And there already are throwing in some versions that it's probably Ukrainian air defense missile, and different bloggers, Telegram channels, some of their TV personalities in Russia. Remember back on MH17, they even brought up the engineers who were building their military book systems, the one that was used to shoot down MH17, and they forced them to lie on air. I think that's exactly what's going to happen now too. It's understandable though. It's obvious what they're doing. They're covering for a military crime. And there is no way to requalify that into anything else. Now a question, what to do with it? Using this opportunity, we also want to let our viewers know that we're doing a fundraiser for OKHMATDET Hospital, the one that was hit. And I'm also thinking we have a lot of people who suffered, families who suffered as a result of this attack. We will be looking for those, and we'll also be bringing up the ways to support them in parallel with military fundraising. So a question now, why is that happening? In order to understand the event, you need to understand the reasons and what are the possible paths to deal with it. And ambassadors of different nations actually are visiting the territory of this hospital. We are already seeing a line of different condemnations from different countries. But As for what to do with it, the versions differ, and we may try to think it through live on air here. Tomorrow is the NATO summit, first day in Washington. Russian style of leadership, of managing these things, is always connecting these attacks with political events or other dates. And we can suspect that their logic is that they do trust that they think that NATO and Americans are conducting a proxy war with Russia using Ukraine, and they're intending to show that this is our area of influence and we will break you over this. Nothing will fly for you. And they used 15 Iskanders and a bunch of other things. Oh, I see there's another alarm in Kiev, right, in Ukraine. So they're using these weapons to attack a number of civilian targets. What is it a demonstration of? I think it's a demonstration of force. Right, Nikolai. So why would they need to do that? I think to show that they're not going to consider NATO or other summits. Right, they want to poke NATO summit and participants to show that they're not afraid and they will be conducting their decisions to the goals they want, regardless of the cost. And NATO and the United States have certain equations and certain rules that they have to follow. So basically in that equation, Russia is showing that here we can go way beyond certain red lines compared to how bounding your reality is. Russia will always be freer in violating all boundaries than you guys do. And they're trying to show that regardless of your supplies of weapons to Ukraine, they will not achieve the goals. They will achieve some effect, but ultimately they will fail to protect Ukraine. And they want to show Ukraine that you are defenseless, that Russia is picking time and location of hits, and you guys need to sit down and think how to agree to our ultimatum, or perhaps we will pressure you to sit down and negotiate, which also will be part of ultimative approach. And I want to say here that I think the series of these attacks will continue, and July will be very hot in this regard. They'll be hitting throughout Ukraine, but they will be shooting up Kiev as well, because demonstrative attacks on Kiev, where diplomatic representatives are located, where media is located, where the center of power is located. So they will continue targeting that megapolis throughout the month to try to force us to sit down and accept their ultimatum, and outlining that the West can do nothing about it. The West will be discussing a lot. The West will be condemning a lot. They will start discussion about fortification of our air defense systems. However, they do not have too much space of increasing our function, because whatever reserves they have is already approaching the red line for the Western military to say, okay, this is our line of balance. We cannot go below that because we need some reserve to make sure we can protect our own territories. And also they are considering that they're trying not to let the conflict spill beyond Ukraine. However, today, President Zelensky, signing an agreement with Poland, did mention that they will be reviewing an opportunity for Poland to shoot down Russian missiles that are flying towards its territory. I don't know if Zelensky jumped the gun here, but these negotiations, these comments are often discussed at the table, but not necessarily are to be brought to the public opinion. And that's an often accusation of Ukraine that very often, even if the information discussed is considered to be private and not public, it often is spilled by Ukraine out in the media. But the fact is that Russia will try to force us to accept their ultimatum. They will continue hitting energy objects, energy transfer lines, energy generating lines, and they will also be hitting civilian targets to try to force us to sit down and accept their terms. And once again, see they're attacking energy infrastructure in summer, not even in winter, to try to highlight that Ukrainians do need to sit down and think about accepting the terms of Putin, and also about who is guilty about energy situation, critical energy situation going into winter. So this is some Jesuit approach from Russia. They're highlighting that, look, we're not doing it right here in winter, so you guys will be really upset at us and resisting more. But we're doing it in advance, so you guys make your own decision whether you want to go fighting in winter or not. And it is a rather sober, rational calculation on their behalf. And what we need to understand about Russia, however we blame them, however we call them inhuman and disgustoids and monsters and whatever other terms you can find, which I generally agree about those who are taking civilian targets today, it still doesn't negate the fact that Russia is conducting this war extremely rationally. It is cynical, it is brutal, but it's a very cold, calculated approach. As for the West is also very rational about this war. And Ukrainians need to understand that. We need to grow and see it. I'm just following people's emotions. Understandably, they're high, but they will exist for days. But nothing will change in regards of changing the strategy. Regardless of how many dead children are we going to show, the West will not give us weapons that will allow us to drastically change the conflict in our favor, in the volumes that we need to. And even if they did, our inner situation and organization as a country would hinder us from using it effectively. So we're in a very difficult situation where we have to choose between horrible, god-awful, and absolutely unacceptable. Well, Alexey, look, last year it seems that air defense systems seems better. Do you think today's attack on civil infrastructure and the fact that missiles flew through and were not shot down, does it show that we are doing it worse? Nikolai, perhaps the way they got to targets is that they are targeting objects throughout the country. They're picking areas that are not too protected. Also, we might be short on certain air defense missiles and systems. And despite they've also actually were attacking our air defense systems too, so they did damage some of us. Today, Kiev air defense systems worked actually well, and they destroyed a lot of missiles, and percent-wise, they did well. However, an interesting aspect you touched here is that there were times when there were much larger attacks coming from Russia, and we've been successful in destroying a lot more numerically, not percent-wise, but numerically. So what I'm suspecting, maybe we have moved some of the defense elements from Kiev area to cover other parts of the country. And Ukraine is a big country. To cover all the targets that we need to cover, you need a lot of air defense systems. And if you have systems, you don't have enough missiles. And if we don't have missiles, they're not being transferred. They're not being given to us. That's why. And you know why we're not. You know, the situation looks very strange when you follow the statements from United States where Biden is making those slogans that he's the guy who stopped Putin, that he's the one who's still running the world, Biden meaning. You did say that just 5% of their Patriot systems would have solved a ton of questions, right? Yeah, they wouldn't solve everything, but they would have enabled us to cover 85% of coverage on the key objects and the main areas in the country, main populated areas. So this is the fella that is not transferring these 50 systems, right? Yeah, this is what we talked about as Bidenism as a principle. It grows from what we can call Obanism, and that one grows from Kissingerism. This is Kissinger's principle. It sounds something like this. If Egypt and Israel are so not smart that they started to fight, and we are against any war in this case, but we'll be using that to increase the control over both and in the region. Basically divide and conquer. And that's exactly what they're doing here as well. They're weakening Russia with our hands, and we, well, if you want to fight, we will help you. If we were trying to freeze the war now, to stop it, they would support us to do that as well. You're free people, make decisions. But definitely there are nuances. Neither America nor NATO, no God, Tsar, or hero will help us. Perhaps God might. But the main question for us is what us, Ukrainians, do want us to become. Do we want to become Afghanistan for Russia? One option. Do we want to be the tip of the spear for the West? Two. Or do we want to be a Switzerland or Finland for ourselves. What do we want in this situation? We are the ones to make a decision. The West will consume any decision we come to. They are satisfied with either. If we'll continue fighting, they will be supplying us some nomenclature of arms that will not be enough to win over Russia. It'll just enable us to prolong the war. But they will, again, no weapons that they will give us will enable us to protect all the hospitals in the country. This task is still not really feasible. And if we decide to freeze the war, to stop it, to sign something, they will say, yeah, sure, we can. We'll support you. They will not initiate this discussion because for them it will mean a similar situation as Afghanistan and legitimizing Putin in one or the other fashion. So it is on us, and we will have to make that decision. This is very sad that you and I have to say these things in the days when children's hospitals and centers were attacked, because very few people in our media, in our leadership, can address it seriously. And in the days like this, specifically, we need to be the ones bringing it to public attention. And I did make a post today that, for example, we do have a party, what we can call a party of war. Those are people who are making themselves in this war, including actively participating in military actions, which is very respectable. And there are different groups there, the ones who are actually fighting, the ones who are just sitting on a sofa and thinking and screaming, and the ones who are thinking, who are also saying that, well, you know, we cannot negotiate with these scumbags in Russia. And when you tell them, okay, step one, this is our position. Step two, you're fighting till the end. What is that end and whose end it is? And that's the answer they cannot answer. The most brave of them are saying the end of it is the destruction of the empire of evil and Ukrainian flag over Kremlin. And someday the West perhaps will join us and we will jointly finish it. Or even without West, but if they give us some additional means, we'll be able to prevail over Russia. So I have a question. The army that failed to hold Avdiivka and Robotyne, Bakhmut, Solidar, Chasov Yar now, soon Toretsk, New York, and some other townships, can this army take Kremlin and destroy Russia without slogans, just soberly, calculatingly analyze it? No, it can't, right? We cannot defend ourselves. We're slowly retreating, much faster than we would have wanted to, and much slower than Russians would have wanted us to, but still we are slowly moving to the left. And the problems of army are real. Officers and soldiers are talking about it more and more. And they're indicating some high-level generals who are using the troops in a certain fashion. And we do have quite a few of those. And if we cannot fulfill these wants and these slogans, what do we do? Well, then, Alexey, I guess it's obvious we need to conduct realistic politics here, right? Right. So what is that? If they destroy our energy system that's already hanging by a thread, if they destroy it come winter, what do we do then? You know, it's difficult for me to comment what's going to be then. I can say what happened last week, but it does push me to conclude that Orban's visit to our country has some relation to it. I would say that his visit of Ukraine is probably an atonement of strength of Ukrainian position, and he indeed bowed to Ukrainian strength and will, and he actually gave us a ball to our court with his gesture that we, I think, could have used. It's very difficult, Nikolai, to talk about that in the day when the kids are killed and Children's Hospital is destroyed, but we have to, unfortunately. All right, our communications are disrupted. How disrupted are they in Ukraine? Communications of the Office of the President. The President said, we're preparing a summit of peace, where Russia will be invited, and before the end of the year, there'll be a peace agreement. We will suggest a peace pathway forward. Then he comes out and says, I'm not talking to Tucker Carlson, and we indicate his relation to FSB, supposedly. And once again, this is one of the key media persons for Trump part of voters in the United States. Once again, Trump is very likely to become the next president and will have and options to affect our capability to continue this war via supply or not supply of military articles, or again, pressuring us to negotiate or maybe helping us to get better terms in negotiations. And we continue calling the scumbags those who are going to sit down and negotiate with, supposedly. I understand that people on social media and Facebook and Twitters and the others, people who are saddened with grief, who are mad with rage, they can be posting these things, understandably. But we sound like a schizophrenic when we try to invite monsters and the scumbags who attacked and killed our children to negotiations. That means a disruption of communications. That means we do not think strategically, and we think in very brief, like music, video clips, emotions. But motivation stems from the picture of the world, the way we see it, and it's a long-term strategic approach, while emotions are very short stories. They exist where there is no worldview. They exist where the worldview doesn't limit their expression. And the way it violates the country, the way it rattles and how volatile it is, I can see that our communication from the President's office is disrupted. And the answers it is giving, they're emotional, they're not rational. They're not solving anything. So we do have very rational West, a very rational Moscow, and a very irrational us. And this is one of the problems. You know, Alexey, when you do say that it's difficult to talk about that on that day, you probably do imply that all our words, all your words, my words, will probably be taken wrong and will be used to show something else, not what we're talking about. And I read some of what Lutvak wrote about strategy and the logic of war, modern war, over the last 100 years or 80 years, including Second World War even. The logic is rather irrational, it's asymmetric, and from that point of view, we'll have to understand the threshold of problems that we have, not from emotions, but from rational tasks that we want to place in front of us. In these corridors, these solutions are found. This is how NATO lives, this is how United States live, and Russia, however, we detest to acknowledge that, but we have to acknowledge that they also live in that corridor. And despite of us living the first 33 years of our independence as an ostrich with a head in the sand, we ignored a lot of real world around us. You did mention today that Dresden, Coventry, and they were very hideous attacks, disruptive attacks in the Western world, destroying each other. But still, under each of those events, those who used these methods, they actually were found among the winners. So Britain destroyed Dresden, but they ended up being the winner, right? On our hand, we do not belong to any bloc. We do not get funded in the volume that we ask for. We're getting some, but we see the results of it in the Kievan streets. We see that in the news, that whatever we are being given, this is definitely not enough. We do not belong to any military bloc, and we are in some position as we are about to be occupied, that in a few short historic spans will be somewhere near the occupied territory status. No, Nikolai, these are emotions. Let's draw the borders on the right and on the left. So on the right, the task of protecting Ukraine is not to be solved by the presence of aid of the West. So the degree of Western participation in our grievances is not going to ultimately solve our security matter. Air defense, navy, land, not enough. And the chances that we will be given enough tools, they're slim, because they're almost none, because the West doesn't have that much. Moreover, in the future, perhaps by 2025, their industries will be on par with our requests, but the question would be, how much of us will be left by that time, how much of our energy systems and our fighting capabilities, and how much will be given ultimately. Because one thing, when Biden and Biden-like say all the right words, but when it comes to transfer of air defense systems, they don't in required quantities. Yes, they are giving some, but the tasks are not solved with the numbers that are on the table. And we're not even talking about solving it completely, but at least providing some military parity. We were given ATACMS that fly 300 kilometers, but we are prohibited to attack Russian airfields. Daily from these fields, they get their jets up to attack Kharkov. And we're not allowed to attack these airfields. You can say how many slogans you like, but it doesn't solve the problem. It only creates conditions for us to deceive ourselves with these slogans and to believe in some illusions. Now let's look on the left side. Putin is saying, we're being told that Putin is going to occupy Ukraine and that he's eternal enemy. Putin doesn't have enough force to attack just the left bank. He doesn't have enough forces to take Chasiv Yar and take Kharkov. He still doesn't have enough forces to take Toretsk. And it's even further to Kramatorsk. So they're losing a lot. They are losing a lot of soldiers. They're going to North Korea to agree about some strategy and get additional aid from that country. What the whole Ukraine can we talk about? Even if they tomorrow occupied the whole country, they would not have enough means to hold it and to keep order here. So this is another line that looks rational. And it is being explained by some proponents that these scumbags are going to destroy us. They're trying to destroy us since Andrei Boголюbsky times, but it doesn't have a reality. And Ukrainian conscience, traumatized by war and events like today, it does believe both lines, on the right and on the left. And the worldview is placed between these two lines, and it's false. This is the problem. Our attention is being moved away from the things that are happening in reality. And in reality, things that are very uncomfortable happening around. And I think what I'll say now, that will be cut for snippets. There is no discussion about occupying the whole Ukraine and Russia. They're technically incapable to do that. That's one. Second, if they did, they do not need Western regions because they understand it will be ongoing partisan warfare. If perhaps they can install their rule over the left bank, but crossing Dnieper and taking central and western Ukraine, that's a different story. Plus, crossing Dnieper means starting an active war with the West de facto. And they are not ready to go for it. They prefer to do a normal proxy warfare, and they understand that their task is exactly as they declare it. I understand it's difficult to believe it, but trust me, after 3 years of being in high politics, what convinced me is that when politicians declare something, 99% is true. People think they lie. They actually are quite true up to 99% of their statements. And that's what they are saying. Demilitarize, denazify as they see us, our sovereignty. Neutral Ukraine. The main goal of their politics is to make sure that they would never be a threat to Russian Federation from the territory of Ukraine. In their view, that can be solved without occupying Ukraine by simple, in quotes, forcing us to peace. Ukraine has a chance to remain a subject and remain a country somewhat limited and cut due to occupation and incapable to return these territories neither by itself nor with the help of the West. But Russia is not talking about taking away our governance and our statehood overall at the moment. So the question is, when will we come to realize that? And second, what are we going to do about it? Is that a question to me, Alexey? No, that's the question to those who create strategic communications in our state. Because people have illusions. Two main rails that these illusions ride on. First is that the West will finally understand something and will give us all the patriots and will join us in this fight and will help us win the damned enemy. And second is the illusion that they want to destroy all of us, which is technically impossible for them. They cannot do it even if they wanted. Even with the level of support that we have, even if we have no support, they will not be able to hold this territory with civil unrest and with partisan actions. They will not have resources to hold that much. Organization capabilities and everything, they're just incapable to do it. And then the resistance will be direct, also from the West as well. So the point here is that we need to get off these two rails that we are riding on, because they very much look like two wires going into the back of your heads to pump a lot of information there outside of your control. We need to put our feet on the ground and understand what is going. There is one more illusion, is the lack of real picture in the country. We're not being informed about real losses in economy, real needs of armed forces, real perspectives, real resources, and how much do we have saved, because this is war and nobody will tell us in the open. But without telling details, you can still give realistic estimations for the society, so the enemy would not be able to use it. But do we see at least one discussion during the last 2.5 years about how long can we withstand outside of the West, in Ukraine proper? Well, Alexey, even on the West, one of the publications this week was opinion poll on the territory of the whole European Union, including Ukraine, including Ukrainian views on what our country needs in order to defend itself. And here they look at different positions, that Ukrainian allies will send more arms and more ammo, that Ukraine will join NATO, that Ukrainian allies will send their armies to Ukraine, that political situation in Russia will change, that Ukraine will get access to European Union, that other countries will join the fight against Russia. Look, but even in this poll, there is no variant that Ukraine will be able to develop itself, to defend itself on its own. This option is not on the table. Even in the EU itself, it seems like this one is not being reviewed seriously as well. It's just not on the table. It's considered to be impossible. There are fantastic options for Russia to crumble and completely dissolve, and that other countries will jump here to fight. But the option that Ukraine will continue developing its own military is not on the table. Look, on the West and in Russia, they gauge Ukraine's capabilities rather similarly to what I just said. They're saying the same thing. Ukraine, in its current capacity, is not capable to push enough organized effort on the organization level to pull itself out of the situation. And they use the historic gap of 33 years after the fall of USSR to see how well can we do that, and how we fought this war for 2.5 years, and how we use Western aid and explosion of corruption and destruction of economy and all these things that we do know, and tortures of small businesses, and politics of goals instead of politics of rationality. And they'll understand that Ukraine in this state is not capable to stop its sliding deep into abyss, not even talking about getting to the positive side. These illusions were in the 22nd year, they actually existed, but they crumbled after our counteroffensive. And what does the world see, what do Russians see, is that Russia slowly, not effectively, but they are gradually increasing the level of their organization and level of their fight, and we are not. And they draw a conclusion that Ukraine will likely break sooner than Russia. Russia likely will break at some point as well. There is a small chance that Russia will split into 33 little bears, but in the West, as in Russia, there is a joint consensus that Ukraine will fall first. The conclusions are different. Russia thinks that they need to push us a little further, so we break sooner, and the West thinks that they need to support us, so we don't break. But despite all that effort, we're still sliding down. That's what I see as well. And that's why my resume today is as follows. Ukraine now has a false software as a state, which instills a false view on the world and unreal connectivity between different actors around it. What is West planning, what is Russia planning? And we cannot grow any efficacy in the country until we honestly acknowledge one thing, that under current firmware that we have, and the level of our organization actually depends on it, we will not be able to increase our efficacy under any conditions. Even if everybody in our country becomes conscious and effective. Because our state ideology is similar to what was Ukrainian Liberation Army. And those who purvey the ideology of that, they end as Ukrainian Liberation Army. You cannot force culturally and geographically and ethnically diverse country to follow a very narrow strip of ideology. Very narrow, very radical, very left, very radically right. It gives emotion, a long-term emotion, and good motivation for a small group of radicals, but doesn't give motivation for millions of usual people. And politics is not being done in the name of 2 million or maybe 200,000 or 20,000 flaming radicals. Politics is done to meet the demands of the silent majority. And narrow ideology destroys any motivation of the majority. Right now are people buying exclusions and reservations from draft. They're buying all the options they can to avoid being drafted. And note, these are same people who are going to pull the bricks out of the rubble of the hospital. Same people. Because here it's simple. Kids suffered. Ukrainians, our people, know what to do. They forget all the quarrels, they self-organize, and we demonstrate what the world was always in awe about. 3 days later, a week later, if nothing new happens like that, we'll get back to our usual Ukrainian language, state, against those who left, fighting those against those who are not fighting. And this is happening not because of the national character of Ukrainians. Ukrainians who left the country, who are in normal conditions, they're showing miracles of efficacy and adaptation. But the system that exists in Ukraine projects the worst features of itself onto people. We can still self-organize, we can still do some things, we can still, in short flashes, show wonders, but there is no long-term motivation and there is no long-term efficacy. And in order to prevail over Russia, we need a very, very long motivation and very long will, longer than the will of Moscow, of Kremlin, which is their main civilizational weapon. They have a capacity to hit the same point for 300 years if they want to. We need to be stronger, we need to be able to withstand that for 301. And what I'm saying is that under current firmware, under current ideology, we will not be able to do the things, to make the steps that we need to make to motivate wide layers of our society. Radicals and patriots, in quotes, will be always rather motivated, even though they get disenchanted as of recently, but still. To motivate the Ukraine at large, you need a wide project. You need something that is close to everyone and that appeals to the main idea of Ukrainian national character or existence, is the idea of free will, idea of freedom. We stopped being a free country. We, in honor of narrow ideology, have shrunk our freedoms everywhere. Official, unofficial, constitutional, everything. Simple example. Military drafting points are saying that starting on the 16th, those who have not refreshed their data in the app will get a letter. And it doesn't matter whether you got the letter, whether you opened it or you didn't open the letter. Even if we got this letter back with a post mail that it was not delivered, we consider that person to be on the run and a fugitive. This is already violation of the basic principle of not guilty until proven. And when you violate the basic principles, you cannot motivate your society. You destroy that motivation in the core. We will not be able to pull this war through, not even to the victory. We'll not pull it even to zero. We'll lose it under the current firmware. Our main task now is, in my view, to take the pause in this war, granted that we have conditions now, and quickly reboot the country. change the ideological firmware, change the level of organization, and come to 2028, 2030. That's the years when, most likely, if Russia doesn't change its vector, and if our politics remain the same, with these two conditions, we will likely run into the second round of the war with Russia. Since we are fighting like this during the war, you can only imagine what will be happening in Ukraine on the post-military phase, how much we'll be organizing and working. I foresee that to be falling in efficacy, and we'll likely not be able to prepare ourselves to the second round, and that's what I'm afraid of, that we'll get to the second round worse prepared than for the first one. And that would mean the end of our statehood, at least for the left bank of Dnieper, for the eastern Ukraine. So this is our path forward. Stop lying to yourself, switch from the rails of emotions to the rails of rationality, and prepare the country in such a fashion, the system of national security, military-industrial complex, in such a way that the second round would not even appear on the horizon as a condition. First, because we agreed about the principles of coexistence with Russia and with the whole Eastern Europe through a collective system of security, and second, because we are so strong that Russia would not want to repeat it second time. We need a radical reform here, a very radical reform of foreign politics, military complex, defense forces, to improve their quality. And to do that, we need to radically change our inner politics, when a citizen and his rights will be put in the corner as the paramount important part of our country, not on words but in deeds. Only that can change the situation where we find ourselves in. There is no other option, just none. And I feel very sorry for people who come to my channels, who try to attack me, because I see the degree of their despair. And I pity them because they cannot understand, as long as they're riding on these two rails between hopes that the West will eventually help us and that Russia wants to destroy us, I can understand what happens in their heads in this duality, especially when you pick the phone in the morning and you see kids under rumble, and you hear kids and doctors' screams from under the crushed hospital. That skews your world perception, that destroys you. And here's the main thing, that a lot of cognitive warfare against ourselves is carried out by ourselves. And what's amazing is that Russia is actually extremely rational in this conflict, and the West is extremely rational. We cannot talk with them on the same language while we're not rational. While their rationality is based on their world systems, how they see them, right? With big ideological machines and other factors, where we feel ourselves as a small cog within one union that we left about 30 years ago, or another union that we're trying to join. They're still not letting us, because we have not developed our own system. Indeed, Nikolai, we still cannot do pro-Ukrainian politics. We either do pro-Russian politics or pro-Western politics. One more point, Ukraine never wanted to be West. Whatever we said in the words, we never wanted to become West. We wanted to be accepted in the West, but we never wanted to be West. Because in order to be West, we'll need to respect the rights of citizens, prop up our constitution to a higher level of importance, and follow the law. And this is another problem. And the beginning of all that lies within the change of the principles of inner politics. Success of our defense activities, success of our industrial activities, success of diplomacy, that will follow the change of inner politics. We need to stop lying to ourselves. We need to rely only upon ourselves, build relations with everybody, but still calculate how much money we have and learn how can we live on this money. For 33 years, we've been implementing politics that are not supported, not based in reality, and that is destroying us. I understand that we want all the scumbags to disappear and all the villains and monsters to disappear, but we cannot be inviting them to the peace summit saying that we have losses and that we'll not be able to pull through. This is our officials are saying now, not some baddie Arestovych. And at the same time, call those whom we invite to negotiate with monsters. We need to make a decision, go one way or the other. And we need to make the choice of the course and follow it. Clench our teeth and go, either peace summit or monsters. This is an example of discombobulated communication. This is how it works in our country. Listen, Alexey, you just repeated the statement that there is no other option for Ukraine but stopping the war and rebooting the politics and the ideas. Well, that, in my view, actually depends upon one person, the president of Ukraine, Alexander Zelensky, who doesn't want to do that. He doesn't want to create pause. He doesn't want to do it under Orban's sauce or Macron's initiative or Chinese initiative. So if it depends upon him, it depends upon him for 100%. What is the way to do it then? There is no simple way to reach that goal then, because then I think we find ourselves, perhaps it's an incorrect statement, but what other comparison can I make here? We are hostages of President Zelensky's will, or we cannot say that, and we're a subject in its own. Nikolai, this is half the picture. I was asked at my school by students. There was a collective scream, actually a scream of any normal Ukrainian. Okay, good. So on the powers that are in Ukraine, since they have strategic levers to change situation, the fullness of responsibility is on their shoulders. But what is the blame towards the usual citizens? How do you think? Usual citizens, do they carry any blame, any responsibility on them? Of course, there is some responsibility on every member of society. And what's the mechanism of responsibility, Nikolai? If we're talking about legal responsibility, that's one story. If it's economic, that's different. How does that work, Nikolai, without economic? The main currency in this world is attention. All politics is based on attention. All economy is based on attention. All processes of psychic activity, of psychological activity of people, anything in our society is based on attention and managing that attention and controlling that attention. And the responsibility of a usual citizen and big masses of people is an incorrect application of their attention, because we're paying attention to wrong subject and wrong areas, and we're not supporting with our attention the right areas. And this is the thing that is that our society is responsible for. This is what on millions of people who are paying attention to wrong pillars. They've been warned 500 times, 700,000 times were explained why not. But people like and prefer to do it this way. And they're doing it because of despair. Because right now, to acknowledge the need to sit down and negotiate on harsh terms, facing that the next round of negotiations, if we don't do it now, will be even on worse terms. And the main fact remains that we will break sooner than Russia does. And we will sit down and negotiate perhaps another half a year or a year, plus another 100,000 deceased and more destruction to our economy. The level of Ukrainian support by the West doesn't give us any other option. And this will not change. There is no scenario where these levels change. So we will pay for these illusions for another half a year, and we're just not adult enough and sober enough to acknowledge that. Neither the state leadership nor the society at large, majority of it, do not have it in them to acknowledge it now. It's just people like you and myself who are ringing that bell, who are telling that we need to stop lying to oneself and to understand reality honestly. But this is scary. First of all, right, the whole machine is running at high speed. And you need to acknowledge that for 33 years you were conducting unsupported politics or paying attention wrongly. For a simple person, it's painful. You invested in the wrong opinions, in the wrong slogans. And look, in the West, there are people who succeed in that. There are people who succeed in changing that and acknowledging their guilt. Like Clinton, he came out and said, I acknowledge that it is on me that I provided input to remove nuclear forces nuclear weapons from Ukraine. What about our society? We don't have it within us now. I'm not saying that we do, to acknowledge that. For us, I've seen an interesting episode today. Maryana, that is fighting with the military mafia single-handedly, wrote not too successful of a post, having not dealt deep with the air defense missiles and all. Not a good post. But I see how officers, colonels and generals are using that immediately to accuse her of her being an enemy, that she is a Russian agent, and start to devalue everything that she said about the army, the real troubles there, just on the basis of one lackluster post. We in our society have the deputy of the Committee of Security fighting the corruption in military, and military corruption is fighting against her. Do you think that if military corruption prevails, it will help you to win over Russia? This is what's happening in the highest echelons of our politics and highest levels of military ministry. Well, honestly, Alexey, Maryana's post was about what? It was about armed forces of Ukraine, that they're not talking about the shrapnel. And in both cases, she reworded that. I think she implied that the missile was still Russian, that shrapnel was not the thing that caused the damage. She still implies that it's not Ukrainian missile, it's Russian, right? Right, Nikolai, we are having this pattern. If we have not learned anything in 2 years, it just confirms my statements before. What does it matter if it's shrapnel or if it's other parts of Ukraine that cause main damage? What's important for us is that regardless of mechanism, how it was done, this is a military crime. And direct guilt is on the shoulders of those who gave this order. And these orders are given on the highest level to use strategic means like that. And they should face responsibility regardless of the goals and motives and technicalities of how things happened. This should be carried out and figured by the Hague Tribunal. Usual common citizen just needs to understand that this is a military crime committed against children and doctors. And instead we start digging deeper into shrapnel, some other components, and trying to attack each other, solving our small tasks, societal group tasks within, not thinking that we're all in the same boat that will sink while we are hitting each other's heads and the hull of the vessel. Inability to rise above that low-level attacks on each other, and like in that anecdote, yeah, I'll double what you have, says the Lord, so take one eye, so the neighbor would lose two. Ukrainians in Canada, Ukrainians in the United States, in Europe, they show the best of them, and they achieve a lot of success in the things that they choose to do. Because the level of freedom in your mind allows you to have long motivation, improvisation. These are the strong features of our character. Why, while we're within the country, we are showing the worst characters? Because we need to change system. We built a wrong system, and we're supporting it with our attention and delusions. And that leads our country to the abyss. And Ukrainians at large do not know the real situation. I know some of it. Having been privy, I can only hint, because I cannot name the real numbers. But if somebody audited us, they would be horrified, I would say. Our energy systems are hanging by threads. It's really the matter of 3 to 4 attacks. Russians are not destroying it fully, only giving us a chance to think, to sit down at the table and discuss how they want us to. Do you think it is so? I know that it is so. And that's the only logical explanation, because they could. And they can destroy it come winter. They're giving a chance to society to trade. It is humanless, it's forcement to negotiations, it's provocation of humanitarian crisis. And that's how they trade with us. That's how they enforce us to talk to them. But on the backdrop of all these knowledge, the screams that will take Vladivostok and there'll be Ukrainian flag over Kremlin, these are emotions. You cannot conduct inner politics, external politics, international politics with this. So we have kids under rubble of the hospital. Probably a lot more dead children, mothers, doctors. That numbers will come. And we need to explain our citizens that, guys, it's not that you don't have the right for emotions. Of course you do. We all have right for emotions. And today we all hate and use the worst expletives and want our victory. But let's calculate how many tanks we have in a pocket. Economic resources, energetic resources, energy systems. And that's the step one. Next step, ask oneself, how did we get here? Third, oh, that's how, so what are we going to do with it? And these several simple steps, Ukrainians unfortunately are continuously failing to make. Everything remains on the level of emotions. That will be the end of us. We're in a burning train that's falling into abyss. Yeah, Alexey, not a light topic, but let's finish the aspect of Bezuglaya post. There were several events related to her struggle, to her fight with representatives of armed forces, specifically strange her argument with Yuri Ignat, an active officer. He used to be a speaker for the Air Force, and he directly attacks her with expletives and accusations, calling her names. And Ignat, in this case, is a very high-ranking officer. He is a colonel. He's a colonel of armed forces, very close to leadership of one of the branches. If he allows himself in the public media to attack Maryana like this, it appears that he violates the order of strategic communications, according to which he needs to coordinate these statements with higher-ranking command, or perhaps he has an okay from the superior command in Ukraine to call her that. Because a congressman, she's also a deputy of the Security Committee. Well, let's start with Nikolai with the fact that she's also a lady. Well, I'm not even talking about that. I am Nikolai, I still do. Do you know the difference between the white officer, white army officer from the Soviet? White officer was extremely well shaven, slightly drunk, and easily differentiates Sarah Bernard from Saint Bernard. Soviet officer, extremely drunk, slightly shaven, and cannot differentiate Saint Bernard from Sarah Bernard. Another anecdote I can tell you from the military world that I was told in the military academy. A small boy is riding a bus with his mom, and he's asking, that fella across from us, is he an officer? Yeah, he is, answers his mom. Just like our dad? Yeah, he is. Why he's not drunk? Asks the boy. Well, I don't know, says mom. Maybe he's undergoing treatment from syphilis. And that's why the officers, the core of there, had respect for women. You can hate women 3 times. You can hate somebody specifically a lot, but you need to be respectful. I'm not even talking about the Congresswoman, about the deputy of the Security Commission, and the existence of this conflict in public discourse, public discussion. But when an officer in the rank of colonel starts to post that in a public space about a woman, what warriors of light are we talking about? This is a collection of jackals. These are the garbage dogs, they are not officers. There is no honor, no understanding how it should be. And no circumstances can justify that, even on that level. And if we're talking about government interests, about transferring things to the open discussion, everybody is reading it. Our enemies are saying that, our partners are saying that. Maryana, she's a deputy of the special committee, and colonels are attacking her with swear words in the open social media. Many of them bearing the rank of speakers of certain commands, certain branches of our army. Where is their leadership? Why are they not stopping it? What is happening in our defense forces? Do you think that people with these views about honesty and integrity and communication can win continental war with an overwhelming opponent? You know, in the intelligence and psychology, there's a very simple principle. Whatever will be, already is. That principle allowed me to start talking about things in October, back then, about things that are happening now. And this principle outlines that it never happens that people who allow themselves to behave like this in the public sphere and towards government officials then suddenly fight well. They suddenly become fantastic soldiers. That's not how it is. If ethics is crumbled, there'll never be order on the level of organization. And however you pull this jacket, it signals the same thing. Incapable. Needs to stop and fully reboot. There is no other exit. With that level of organization, we will otherwise lose this war with these ethics, with these relations. Whatever you take, that's exactly a signal we're getting. End of hour 1.